Well, I guess I'll start. Thank you everyone for coming today. My name is Jordan Hankin. I am a graduate research assistant and master's student here at Michigan State Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. My advisor is Dr. Timothy Gates, and today I'll be presenting some of my work on the evaluation of driveway assistance devices at low volume access points within one-lane, two-way work zones. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'll go through introduction, some literature review, the objective of the study, go over our data collection methods, the preliminary results that we've come across, and some of the next steps in future work that we're looking into.
Jordan, can I jump in real quickly? Could you turn off your video? Your audio is a little bit garbled.
Yeah.
Reduce your bandwidth.
All right. Okay, so just to give an introduction into one-lane, two-way work zone traffic control. So the most common method is what you can see here, which is a flagger, whether they're stationed at one end or both ends for work zone with the slow stop paddle. However, a study from 2003 to 2010 by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics showed that there were 442 worker fatalities within roadway construction zones, and 92 or 21% of those fatalities involved flaggers. Flaggers are also shown in some studies to cause an increase in delay. Two separate studies showed a 0.1 hour or 5% increase over other methods like portable traffic control signals or pilot vehicles. They've also been shown to be costly, up to $9 to $14 an hour or $30,000 a year. Which is a significant amount when there needs to be multiple flaggers on a site, and that money could be reallocated towards other construction activities. They've also been shown to be replaceable with high compliance rates, so up to 92.7% of drivers were compliant with other methods like the pilot vehicle or portable traffic control signal. So like I've been mentioning, that's where alternative treatments came into play. So you can see the portable traffic control signal, the automatic flagger assistance device, and the pilot vehicle. And these are all alternatives to controlling mainline traffic in a one-lane, two-way work zone. They've been shown to operate with high compliance rates, and currently there are standardized guidelines that exist in the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or MUTCD, for these devices, and they're well understood by motorists. One thing to note is that the MUTCD still states that when both ends of a work zone are not visible, flagging procedures or a portable traffic control signal, both with and without a pilot vehicle, is still required. So another issue that arises on one-lane, two-way work zones is that there's often more access points to the work zone that are low volume, such as residential or commercial driveways. And so that is where the driveway assistance device or the DAD comes into play. So these are DADs, just kidding, not what we're talking about here. So this is what the driveway assistance device is. So the DAD was introduced by Texas Department of Transportation and the Texas Transportation Institute for use at low volume access points like residential, commercial driveways, or rural intersections. It essentially works in conjunction with portable traffic control signals and allows for the removal of flaggers at low volume access points. And I will get into how they operate in the next slide. They've been shown to operate with high compliance rates by TxDOT and Michigan Department of Transportation. Up to 82.8% of drivers conduct a legal movement when faced with this device, and up to 95.7% of those movements were considered safe movements. However, as you can see in these figures, there are multiple designs and auxiliary signs that are used in conjunction with this device. So there's certainly a lack of nationwide standardization and research due to the innovative nature of this device, and as such, there are no existing guidelines in the MUTCD. So just to show how the DAD works, essentially this is a one-lane, two-way work zone in this diagram. You can see here, this would be the traveled lane, this is the access point, and this is the closed lane where the cones are. So basically, a driver wishing to exit this lane would be given an arrow and would then be able to proceed with, at the beginning of a mainline platoon coming from this way, the red signal would tell the access point that they need to stop, and then the situation would alternate as this direction is given the green for this platoon to proceed. And this would work in conjunction with any other access points that are within this work zone. And just to mention that these portable traffic control signals would be at either end of the staging of the work zone at that time. So just some quick literature review. Two of the main studies that were used when we were working on this study were a study by Melissa Finley called Traffic Control at Access Points Within Alternating One-Way Operations. And essentially this was comparing a controlled and non-controlled study of two different driveway assistance device designs, which are shown below. So the doghouse is the one on the left, and then the blank out is this one on the right, which has sort of diagrammatic signals to alert drivers. And essentially what it showed is that the doghouse design was much less understood and complied with than the blank out device on the right. And so some issues were noted were based on the yellow arrows on the doghouse, which were potentially misunderstood by motorists who may have thought that the yellow implied a yield rather than the intended meaning, which was to stop and then proceed. In this picture, you can see a no turn on red sign. However, in this study, it was mentioned that that sign was not present. So that turn prohibition was not a part of that study. And then often drivers had to ask the road workers how to approach the device and what was the correct movement. The next study was the MDOT Driveway Assistance Device Final Report, which is a summary of 5 pilot tests from 2015 to 2018 across the state, where the DADs were placed at residential driveways. And this report found that 82.8% of all observed movements at the DADs were legal. And adding on to that, with the illegal movements, 98.5% of the total movements were safe. A couple issues were noted about site characteristics, where often if a driver at an access point could see either end of the work zone or the platoon proceeding through the work zone, they were often able to judge whether it was safe for them to make a movement and thus jump that steady red signal and make an illegal movement. And also volume was noted as an issue, and that potentially using storage lanes at higher volume sites to provide a left and right turn lane would be beneficial in the future when using driveway assistance devices. And so with all that said, and the lack of standardization of the device, the inspiration for this study comes from the MUTCD, which states that the uniformity of the meaning of traffic control devices is vital to their effectiveness. So essentially, this project aims to determine the DAD design which best conveys a legal, safe movement to a motorist. And mainly that was conducted in this study by looking into different auxiliary signs to be used with the device. And then ultimately, once the best design was uncovered, the results will be used to develop guidelines for the best DAD design and use. So just to get a little into the data collection that we conducted for this study, so there was a digital motorist survey, and then subsequently last summer, there was a field data study. So the survey was structured with questions in 2 different ways. So the first question style was a sign message / signal rating, where the participants in the survey were given the proper legal action and were then asked on a scale of 0 to 5 stars, similar to like an Amazon rating. So half stars were also available. They were asked, how effectively does each of the following signs or signal communicate the proper action? And the second question was a driver actions question, where the participants were given a image of a DAD signal or sign and then asked what the correct action was. So the survey objectives were basically to determine the comprehension of these 5 signs in this row. the comprehension of the signal arrangement and signal color, the arrow color, and then the importance of including a no turn on red sign with the auxiliary signs. So a quick survey summary. It was a Qualtrics online survey of nationwide of drivers over 18 years old. Overall, 1,015 genuine answers were collected. It was about 50-50 male-female split with a median age of 35 to 44 and median annual miles driven of 8,000 to 12,000. So just getting into some of the results from the survey, some of the preliminary results about the sign message without no turn on red. So the results so far have shown when you look at the mean rating that the three highest were the wait for arrow before turning at 3.64, the wait turn only in direction of arrow at 3.60, and the turn only in direction of arrow at 3.66. And these three signs also had the highest percent of ratings at or above 4.5, and then subsequently the lowest percentage of ratings below at 2.0. So that could really indicate the importance of including this wait message with the auxiliary sign, as that seems to have been important in the understanding of the device with the high mean ratings. And this is some of the results that we found on the importance of including a no turn on red sign with the auxiliary. So as you can see from these results as well, the mean score, the mean comprehension or understanding score was over 0.3, or at least 0.3, when you compare the auxiliary signs both with and without the no turn on red. And then in addition, the percent at or above 4.5 when there was a no turn on red was significantly higher. And that gave some good weight to the research team, the importance of including a no turn on red sign with these auxiliary signs in conjunction with the DAD. Just to continue with the no turn on red sign, basically participants were asked in this first question what the correct legal action was, and they were shown the second picture with the DAD with the no turn on red sign. And we were essentially able to track the number of incorrect responses from question 1 to question 2. And this graph shows that the number of incorrect responses decreased for all of the answer choices except for unsure once participants were shown the no turn on red sign. So that indicated, again, strongly the importance of including the no turn on red sign to ensure that motorists understand that they cannot proceed when the red is being shown. So signal arrangement was also looked at. Basically, the highest mean score was the horizontal signal at 3.90. The doghouse was fairly close as well. And then what we called the red over yellow arrows was the lowest. In the field study, the horizontal signal design was ultimately used, but in the future, it could be worth looking into the doghouse design as well. It's also worth mentioning in our study that we used red arrows. And then the final question from the survey was, what should drivers do when facing this flashing blank colored arrow signal? And so the options of yellow arrow, red arrow, and then red arrow with this additional auxiliary sign. The correct action was to stop and turn left when clear of traffic. So clearly when the red arrow was shown, this was the more popular answer than the yellow arrow. This is a huge difference. And then the number of correct responses was even higher when the sign was included. So that possibly indicated that including that auxiliary sign was important to driver comprehension. And so just to get into the field data study now, which we conducted this past summer of 2020. So our project location was on US 31 in Bensonia, Michigan, which you can see highlighted in red on that state map. And in this area, US 31 is a 2-lane rural highway with a center turn lane. And essentially this portion of US 31 is in a low density commercial area. There's a strip mall on one side and some smaller businesses on the other side, restaurants, car garages and trailer parks. Oh, sorry. And this is also a tourist area, which is significant because in the summer there is major traffic from out of town visitors. So it is an area with a lot of state parks, recreation areas. It's very popular. So despite the rural location of this test site, there was a high likelihood that we were capturing unfamiliar drivers, which was definitely important when looking at this innovative traffic control devices and how drivers reacted to it. And so due to this being this low commercial area, we were able to put DADs at 10 different driveways and intersections for this study. So just to discuss the sign combinations that we ended up using for this study. So the one on the left was the standard MDOT sign, which is proceed on flashing red arrow after stop. That is an older sort of sign, but MDOT wanted us to test that. And then looking at the 4 innovative signs on the right, it's worth mentioning that 3 of the 3 highest rated signs from the survey, the turn only, the wait for arrow, and the wait turn only, were included in the field data study. So we wanted to see how those worked in the field. The stop and wait for arrow is also a variation of one of the signs that was used in the survey. It's also worth noting that the Federal Highway Administration was a fan of the turn only in direction of arrow. So we wanted to make sure to test that as well. So looking into the sites where we collected data at, starting from left to right, the leftmost picture was the earliest sites in this study. So we tested out the device at 2 different residential street intersections with just that MDOT proceed sign. And then also at a site where the DAD had no auxiliary sign on it. So we were able to get some data there. And in the middle picture was pretty much like the meat and potatoes of our sign rotation. So basically we collected at 2 more sites with just the proceed sign. But then at the Save a Lot, which is the grocery store, and the McDonald's, which is obviously a restaurant, that's when all of the signs arrived from the sign shop. So we were able to start the rotation. So at the McDonald's and the Save a Lot, we rotated all 5 of those signs through, and that's where we got a majority of our data. And then moving to the right picture, which were the last sites that we tested the device at, was a medicinal marijuana dispensary and a trailer park where we tested the proceed sign, the turn only sign, and the wait turn only sign. Just a little more about the data collection too. So we attempted to include at least 1 morning and 1 afternoon data collection period per sign, per site. And it was sort of a random order of how the signs, when and where the signs were displayed, but basically it was done to make it most efficient for the people that were up in Benzonia replacing the signs on a daily basis. So just to discuss the data that we collected, essentially for every vehicle that was observed at a DAD, there were 3 different locations within the observation that data was collected. So first was at the arrival to the queue, or if there was no queue, when the vehicle arrived on camera. So essentially the queue position was recorded. If there was none, that was a 1. If the vehicle was out of screen in the queue when it appeared, we called that a 3+. And then also we took a timestamp when the vehicle reached that front of the queue, or if no queue, when they reached the front of the driveway, the signal or the signal that the DAD was displaying at that time was recorded. A timestamp was recorded again, and then it was also noted whether that vehicle came to a full stop or not. And then the last location was at the entrance to the main line, and then subsequently after. So the DAD signal display was recorded again, another timestamp, the action that vehicle made. So whether they made a left through or a right movement, and then whether that was a legal or an illegal movement. And it's worth mentioning that with this DAD design, there was no way to provide a legal through movement. So any through movement was called illegal. The gap timestamp, so whatever gap that vehicle accepted was recorded, and then whether the vehicle proceeded or joined a platoon. So here's a little matrix of how we classified movements. So basically the ideal movement was a legal, safe movement. So that would be a right turn on a right arrow or a left turn on a left arrow. A legal, unsafe movement would be also on an arrow, but driving around a queue leader to enter a main line, forcing the main line to slow, or driving into a closed lane. An illegal safe movement, where we got a lot of these illegal safe movements, was joining the end of a platoon on a solid signal, for example, accepting a gap within a platoon, making a crossing or a through movement. And then illegal unsafe would also include like a wrong way entrance on an arrow or driving into oncoming traffic. And this is not inclusive. There were certainly other aspects of these three that would make an illegal safe or unsafe movements. So just some quick examples of illegal and or unsafe movements. So in number 1, you can see an illegal but safe movement, which is a vehicle turning right despite a left flashing arrow showing before the main line platoon arrives. Number 2 is illegal and unsafe, where a vehicle enters the work zone on a closed lane on a solid signal. Number 3 would be also illegal and unsafe, which is a vehicle entering a platoon at too small of a gap. You can see the SUV entering the main line, but then that mainline truck had to slow to allow the SUV to enter. Number 4 would be a classic example of illegal but safe, which would be the vehicle joining at the end of a mainline platoon on a solid signal. And then number 5 is an image progression of a legal, but I'm sorry, that says legal safe, but this is a legal unsafe movement where the blue van drives around the red SUV because the van wanted to turn left on a left arrow, but the queue leader did not want to turn left. So essentially this van was in the entrance lane to the driveway, which creates an unsafe situation. So just to get some preliminary results from the field study, we have not done statistical analysis on the data yet, but essentially we got 2,258 observations across all sites and signs. Certainly the majority was at the McDonald's, the far majority. So just getting to the legal movement rate, you can see there's an average legal movement rate of 62% across all sites. This certainly varied at different sites and was likely had something to do with some of the site characteristics, like whether there was certain construction activities going on or just some of the volume. But the actual highest legal movement percentage was at the McDonald's. And then to get into the by sign type, the average was of course 62% again, but it is worth mentioning that the two highest legal movement rates by sign type were 67% and 69% by the two signs with the wait message, which were also the highest rated signs from the survey. And so that was really interesting to see that those signs were, possibly had something to do with drivers making illegal movement. And that's something that we're going to look into as we do analysis on this data. And just to compare safe versus unsafe safe movements, it's obviously that most of these movements were safe, both illegal and legal movements. The far majority were safe, which is good. But ideally in the future, the work with this device will be attempting to convert all of these illegal movements and these unsafe movements to a legal and safe movement. So some trends in queuing time, certainly it was pretty variable between all sites, but then a little, a little more closely spaced by sign type. And like I said, that probably has a lot to do with site characteristics, like the McDonald's highest volume sites. So there were more queues and more likely to probably have longer queues there. Dwell time, which we called the amount of time that a vehicle waited at the front of a queue before entering the main line. Again, more variable by site, but a little more compactly spaced across all sign types. And then same trend occurred with gap time across site and sign types. However, the gap time was a little more closely spaced by site. And so that actually could be a good indication that motorists were not accepting too small of gaps and making those unsafe movements, which is a good thing. However, I think it is worth noting that the fact that there's more variation by site could indicate that just the site characteristics itself had a big impact on how a motorist interacted with the DAD. And we're going to be looking into that as we analyze this data, as well as the effect of the different signs on motorists. So one thing that we're certainly going to look into as well in the future is a breakdown of the data from the McDonald's, which was over 50% of our data. The McDonald's also had the highest hourly traffic volumes of all the driveways, and all 5 sign types were evaluated there. And it kind of creates a little microcosm of the entire study. The sign, the illegal movement rates by sign followed the trends of the rest of the study, of course, and we got even higher percents of legal movements on the 2 signs with the wait messages at the McDonald's. So some more next steps would be just to inspect the data a little further and ensure that we're classifying movements correctly. For the survey, to probably conduct some sort of ordinal regression to understand the rank choices between the different sign types, field data, possibly some sort of logistic regression to understand the relationship between different variables on how motorists reacted to a driveway assistance device, and then ultimately, once the best DAD design is determined, the guidelines for the DAD will be developed. A little more on future work would be looking into the differences between using red and yellow arrows, and then including possibly the doghouse signal design into the study. And then something that I mentioned earlier is that this device does not provide a way for legal through movements to occur. And that actually creates kind of an issue. So studying the device at 4-leg locations would be important as you look at this top figure where this black SUV is trying to exit on a right arrow when this silver minivan is exiting on a left arrow, while at the same time this black minivan has crossed the street. So there's just a lot of conflict that could go on when 2 DADs are right across from each other. You can see this one here and this one over here. And so this is just kind of a little diagrammatic that I created that could be a potential way to add storage lanes at a 4-leg location, and possibly another innovative sign to use with the device. But there's certainly a lot that would need to be looked into, such as the storage lanes and providing adequate signal timing to ensure that all the access points are given adequate time to make their movements in a safe manner. Also looking at stop location, which was not standard in our study, would be important to see if the stop location had an effect on how drivers interacted with the device. And then something that was mentioned in previous literature is relative portable traffic control signal location to the DAD, where if a motorist was able to see that PTCS or the platoon entering or leaving the work zone, if that had an effect on whether a driver was more or less likely to jump that steady red signal and make an illegal movement. So these are my references, and thank you for listening. Any questions, please go ahead. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Jordan. So any questions from the audience, either feel free to type those into the chat box or unmute yourself. Okay. So I guess Anthony has a largely rhetorical question, is whether you prank the customers, just leave the sign saying wait. I would presume not, but
they'd probably still be stuck at that McDonald's right now if we did that. So
this is a question maybe for Dr. Gates, but I'm just curious, do we know, is this device being considered in the revisions to the MUTCD that are being looked at right now?
No, it's still going to be considered as an experimental device. And, Chris, I didn't get a chance to look through some of the changes related to this device that our MDOT liaison mentioned, but it's not going to be included in the new MUTCD. That's for certain. and nor will there be any information as to auxiliary signs that should be utilized as well. So this study was supposed to provide information to the FHWA, and we will, of course, provide information to the FHWA. And any of these experiments that are going on with the DADs are supposed to inform the FHWA. But I think the FHWA is having a difficult time of sifting and sorting because each and every study across the country, and there's like 5 to 7 of them going on right now, I believe, uses different configurations of the signal head, or signs, etc. So.
Okay, interesting. So Anthony was just wondering how much these cost to supply at a site. If we have general information to that end.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think they were around $10,000.
Yeah. Yeah, they're
Would you say that again? 10,000, was it for the whole job?
Oh, no.
operated?
That would be per unit. Yeah. But they're self-contained with batteries, so there isn't any fuel costs or anything, at least with keeping them up and running, just charging the batteries.
Because like a portable changeable message sign might be, say, $2,500 or $3,500, like for the duration of the work zone. Just a rental fee, basically. Whatever the contractor charges for it.
Jordan's given the cost of the actual unit, not the rental cost.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure of the rental cost, I guess, and the dynamic messages or the dynamic message signs. I mean, that's certainly an alternative as well, but I think the idea is to study, something that's sort of traffic signal related to see how that can be used to replace a flagger.
Okay, I've got a question that you might not have looked at in any level of detail yet, but when we look at the results of the Qualtrics survey, I'm wondering if we see any differences from a geographic perspective, and if we haven't started looking at that yet, I'm just generally curious if we know, the larger states that are going to comprise the bulk of that sample, if we know anything as to whether or not they would have different standard applications or the degree to which these devices have been tested there. Do we have any insights to that? And I would suspect, TTI doing a lot of the research that this has been deployed in Texas somewhat widely, but I guess I wasn't sure about some of those other states. So any knowledge on that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, like you said, so Texas is certainly doing a lot of work on this. So they have a lot of opinions on how the device should be designed, and they've been studying that as well. I have not looked into necessarily a lot of the differences in terms of like how people could respond based on their location. I've seen some summaries of how the device is designed in other states. But that is a good point because I think I mentioned it briefly in the presentation, but just the differences in states between the not necessarily cultural, but like how people react to a flashing yellow versus a flashing red. Certainly in Michigan, there's differences, and both of the arrow colors are present, but in many states, one arrow is present in their traffic system and the other is not. So if a driver's never seen a flashing yellow, they might not understand what that means, or vice versa with the red.
To that point, Dr. Savalainen asked a great question, and we know that the DADs, even in these states where they are deployed, are not very widely deployed. I mean, Texas would be the best example, and even so, it's such a large state, I would have to imagine. We didn't even bother asking that question as a part of the survey. We just assumed that nobody has any baseline knowledge of this sort of a device. But it is a good point, some of these regional differences to some of the other things like Jordan alluded to, like flashing red versus flashing yellow, the use of no turn on red, some of these other characteristics that maybe provide more broad and generalizable information, in addition or above and beyond the DAD's related geographic factors. But like doghouse signal versus horizontal signal, those might be used differently. I'd never seen the red over yellow signals that we had in here. That was like Nebraska and maybe one other state. I'd never actually seen that in my life before. So.
Okay. As just a quick aside, it looks like Steve Stapleton tracked down a cost of $3,125 for a 2020 project. So we don't really have a lot of context on that, but so comparable ballpark to that number that Anthony had cited. And Anthony had another question, and that basically relates to the red over the yellow arrow seems confusing. So why not make it a red X instead? He notes that he would have stopped and turned right on red. Any thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that was that I would also probably agree that the red over yellow arrows is confusing. And now that I think about it, you were mentioning the dynamic messaging sign, this blank out device sign. I think, that in the Texas survey, this was the most comprehended device. And I mean, it's pretty clear one way and then you can turn left the other way. So that would be possibly a way to incorporate a dynamic message sign into this usage within a work zone.
Can I ask another question about the sample sites? As far as the amount of traffic at each driveway, trying to narrow down, how applicable would these be at a really low volume residential or agricultural? Like, where's the cutoff point where it's necessary instead of, I don't know, just leaving it uncontrolled?
Yeah, I think that is certainly something we're looking into. I think our sites, the majority of our sites were really low volume, but a lot of our data came from the McDonald's, the Save-A-Lot, and the trailer park. I'd say the trailer park was probably the most resemblant of like a really low volume site. And I think that's something that we can look into, the cutoff point. The study from Texas that I referenced, that was at a rural intersection in like really rural Texas. I think they got about less than 100 people observed interacting with the device. So that might, give some insight into how well people react. But yeah, we'll definitely look into that cutoff point, I think.
I think one other aspect that's really important to this is the distance from, can they see the end of the work zone, of the lane closure? Can they see the traffic signal at either endpoint? And that really plays a role in their ability to kind of watch and monitor the cues, the platoons that are coming or going away. Now, I will say also the McDonald's location is probably a little bit on the upper threshold. I think we had very high volumes, higher than maybe anywhere else for the use of the DADs, to the point where it might have been actually a location that would have warranted a portable traffic signal, especially at the McDonald's where there was the ability to go across. They might have, I'm surprised they didn't consider putting a portable traffic signal there to control all directional movements.
I guess a few questions on the observational study, and I understand this is probably still in progress to some degree, but do we have any insights as to whether the construction, staging, and sequencing in the order in which these were displayed at certain locations might have had an impact? Because given that this is a rural community, I would expect a lot of the same drivers were seeing these devices at different locations, perhaps. So any inclinations one way or the other there at this point?
I don't think we have necessarily any inclinations like that so far, but as I was saying, like this portion, this staging of the device was certainly the longest part of our data collection and also the longest part of the staging during our study. So yeah, you're probably correct in that people saw the device at the same location on multiple different days, especially I don't know, people that go get their coffee at McDonald's every day of the week. Um, and so we might have to look into seeing how maybe throughout a week at, you know, a certain location, did that affect the legal movement rate once people had seen the sign a couple days and had understood how to approach the device at that certain driveway. But yes, I see what you're saying.
The
And
good
I
news
wouldn't-
is that
oh, go
I was going to say at the McDonald's and the Save-A-Lot, we were able to rotate all 5 signs, and we were able to capture AM and PM. Like, so we were just sequencing them through in random. I mean, the order was randomized, but they, each of those locations, I think maybe with one exception, did get each sign both in the AM period and a PM period. And this was over a 2-week period. So, and that was the middle stage. So they'd already had these for about a month at the north end of the project. And this was the middle portion of the project after the DADs had been used on the north side for, what was it, I think a month or two, roughly. So they were somewhat familiar at that point. And also consider that this was summertime in northern Michigan, where there was probably a fair amount of traffic that was unfamiliar recreational traffic too. So, which was good. Sorry, Pete.
No, that's about all I had. I was going
Jump
to
you
say
off
we
your-
probably can't pull out anything positive, but it was interesting that the marijuana dispensary had the highest gap time. So just as an aside. Okay, yeah, I think there's some interesting stuff here. I'll be curious once we see what some of the results, the more detailed analysis looks like. So, any other questions from the audience? Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay, so just a reminder. Oh, we had something come in. Nope, just so yeah, well done, Jordan. A reminder to everyone: the Qualtrics link is in the chat box still. So if you could please complete that at your earliest convenience, so we could get some feedback to Jordan, that would be very much appreciated. And then from my perspective, we will be back here again next week for a presentation by Meghna. So thank you all very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next week.